Notre Dame heads into the bye week with a 4-1 record and 2 wins over ranked opponents. So why does it feel like this team still has such a long way to go? That's next on Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. My name is Tyler Wojciak and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and it is great to have you here on Tuesday, October 1st, and thanks for kicking off the month by making this your first listen of the day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts, and you can watch every episode on YouTube as well. Please remember to like the video and subscribe if you are watching on YouTube, or rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast if that's how you're tuning in today. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. It's Tuesday, which means we got Luke Smith on the show today to go over the 3 things we liked and didn't like from the Louisville game. We were both in attendance for this one, so I was actually able to contribute to the boots on the ground report, and I think we both feel better about the win now that we're a couple days removed from it. No, it wasn't always pretty, but Notre Dame kept a top 15 team in check throughout most of the game, in which they absolutely had to win. Now the Irish head into the bye with a win, a little bit of momentum, but certainly a lot to improve on as well. Now let's talk to Luke. All right, Luke, you and I both felt pretty confident in the lead up to this game. And even though it wasn't always pretty, I feel like we had a pretty good read on this game going into it. And in the immediate aftermath, you and I talked about how it wasn't a super enjoyable watch in the moment. But now that you've had some time to reflect, what stands out to you the most about this game?
Yeah, wow, it really wasn't actually very enjoyable in the moment. To the point where even when Notre Dame, it was clear they were going to win and they were taking knees in the victory formation, like the people I was with asked me if I was okay, just because I was like, I think still kind of ill from the fact that the game had gotten so close. But I think the takeaways are that this was an incredibly banged up Notre Dame football team that after really had their backs put up against the wall in the first drive when Devin Ford fumbles the kickoff, kind of dominated the Louisville offense all day. And I know that they actually did get outgained, but with primarily backups out there for large portions of the game, Louisville really never had a chance of actually threatening and making this a real game. So that's really impressive. And while there's things on offense I'd like to see improved, and I wish there could have been a little bit more consistency there over the course of the game, Notre Dame defense is very talented and very deep, and I think that some of those transfer portal acquisitions that we saw them make this offseason are showing to be very important, with guys like Rod Hurd and Jordan Clark really stepping up, even if just from a depth perspective, having that depth is so critical.
Yeah, all week of the lead up, we were like, this is a must-win game for this team so that they have any remaining hopes of making the college football playoff. And for Marcus Freeman, it was such a pivotal moment because this season could really unravel with a loss, and then you go into the bye week with 2 losses in the month of September. Like, things could have been really, really bad. And if you had told me before the game that Jack Kaiser was going to barely play because he would get hurt, they would lose Boubacar Traore in the first quarter, that Christian Gray would actually not play in this one, despite some sort of back and forth rumors throughout the week that he would play or then he wouldn't play. And then just you add all that up, and then also Benjamin Morrison would miss a chunk of the game too. Like, if you had told me all that before the game, I would be like, oh, well, they're going to lose. And not only did they not lose, but they were in total control of this game. They were leading for 52 minutes, and they were leading by double digits for 28 minutes in this game, despite all the injuries we just mentioned. So, yeah, it wasn't always pretty, but going up against a top 15 ranked team at home in a game that they had to win, I think is a really impressive performance.
It is impressive, and you're right. I think as it was later revealed, like Kaiser and Morrison went into that game with injuries too and tried to give it a go. And Morrison really seemed to be suffering from that when he was out there for most of the game, although he did have one really big play. So that's significant. And while it's not easy to realize that in the moment, I think having some distance from it has allowed me to establish that, okay, that was actually a pretty good one by Notre Dame.
Normally, you are the one that handles the boots on the ground report, but I was there too. We were together before the game started. Yeah. We talked about the tailgates and everything, but then we separated when it was time to go into the stadium. And it was not a great sign as we were walking in that it started to rain. I was like, oh, here we go. Like, it had been cloudy throughout most of the day. The sun would kind of peek its head out a little bit, but then it started raining right as the game started, and it had a big impact on the game immediately. Devin Ford fumbles the opening kick, which was honestly pretty hilarious. I was shocked at how calm I was in that moment because like, whatever. And then Notre Dame bounced back quickly. But like, what did you make of the pregame atmosphere and the tailgate lots in the crowd? What was your perspective on the whole thing?
I thought it was a pretty good weekend in general. There weren't as many Louisville fans as I thought there were going to be either. I felt like in past years when Notre Dame's played schools, particularly schools that are more local to South Bend, there's been a bigger contingency. And maybe it's just because, I don't know, Louisville played at Notre Dame a decade ago or whatever, but I didn't feel like there was that many of them. So that was nice. And then I would say that as far as the crowd's concerned, I wasn't at the NIU game. I thought the crowd was straight up bad at the Miami game, and I said that. I thought it was good at this game. I thought people were engaged, and really, like, that is what I expected. It was a bigger game, and it's kind of hard to fault the fans for not always being up for games like Miami or NIU, but I knew they would be up for this one, and I thought they were. And outside of one exception, when Riley Leonard briefly had the wind knocked out of him and some old tool in front of me started cheering the injury so that Angeli would go in, I thought the crowd was very, very good. So props to Notre Dame fans for showing up and actually making a difference in the game, which Jeff Brom even alluded to on that delay of game towards the end of the game. But I thought it was a good atmosphere, and I had a blast.
Yeah, I got there on Friday afternoon, and I was like, oh, yeah, this feels like a big game buzz, because you and I have been around for so many games when we were students there. Like, it was pretty obvious when there was a big game and when there was just, your average home game. Like, you could start to feel it by Thursday when there were just more people around campus. So when we're walking around Friday, I'm like, oh yeah, this feels like it's going to be a big game. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then I was a little bit worried on Saturday as we were walking around the tailgate lots. I'm like, man, it feels a little thin in this parking lot right now. But then it really picked up. We go into the game. I think everyone was jacked up before the game, before that opening kick. The crowd was absolutely feeling it. It was loud. They weren't bothered by the rain or anything like that. So it could have gone really poorly once Devin Ford fumbled and Louisville scored immediately. But it took about a drive or two, and then that crowd was back at full tilt, and it was really, really loud right after Notre Dame made that play on special teams. Really, Louisville made a mistake. But when Notre Dame almost recovered that muff punt for a touchdown, that was a great moment, and that felt like a big game. And unfortunately, I don't know how many people from the national media and things like that were able to watch it because it was on Peacock, but it just felt like a big game environment. And I thought the crowd really delivered in a way that it hadn't really all season long, and maybe even a little bit before that as well.
Yeah, and it hadn't had much reason to either, for being completely fair. But they did, I thought. And you mentioned the the national media not perhaps being able to watch most of this game, and I think that's actually a really astute point that I hadn't thought of, because as I've listened to a number of national outlets on this game, they've all kind of had a different take. None negative towards Notre Dame, but it makes me realize that it's likely none of them actually watched this game because it was on Peacock and they couldn't watch it.
Yeah, I know a lot of fans have complained about Peacock, so we're not breaking any news here if I just go on a rant about how ridiculous it is. You've probably already heard it before. So I'm not going to do that today, but I really hope that the people in the Notre Dame athletic department and NBC come together. Like, this cannot happen again. You cannot have the biggest home game of the year on Peacock. And I know that they kind of got screwed with the Florida State and how they are not only a disappointment, they might be one of the worst teams in the Power Four. So to have the night game scheduled for that, like, there's no way they could have seen that coming. I don't fault them for that. But this Louisville game was always going to be a big game. There's no reason it should have ever been on Peacock. And if you want to do a game that's a little bit better than, what was it last year, Central Michigan or Toledo, then do Army, do Navy. There is absolutely no excuse for this game to be on Peacock. And because you and I were both there, we weren't watching it live, but it sounds like people didn't love the broadcast booth. Actually, take it back. People seemed very fond of Paul Burmeister in the booth for play-by-play, which is great. He was great as the voice of Notre Dame radio, but it sounds like Jason Garrett had an all-time bad day, so it wasn't a great viewing experience for the fans at home, and I just really hope that Notre Dame actually takes legitimate action, because there's always going to be a Peacock game, but this cannot happen again.
Yeah, I'm not counting on them doing that, but it sounds like people are kind of reaching their wits' ends with Jason Garrett, so good call out there.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. But now let's get to the three things that we liked and didn't like from this one. But let's start off, as we always do, on the bit more optimistic side with what we liked. What stood out to most of you on that side?
You mentioned the opening kickoff fumble by Devin Ford, and it was terrible. But what I noticed is that obviously Louisville immediately scored, basically coming off that fumble. And I did not expect to see Devin Ford out there, and he was not out there in that sort of front position in front of Jaden Harrison. They put Colgate transfer Max Hurleman in there, and they also then had Max Hurleman returning punts on Saturday as well. He was also a gunner on the punt team himself and made a couple tackles. He was kind of all over the field. It makes me wonder, if Devin Ford doesn't fumble that ball, do we see him out there returning punts too? I don't know that we did. That might have been a realization of the coaching staff. Let's get our John Goodman-esque character out there today, somebody who's just going to catch the ball, because he did just do that, but he also had a 7-yard punt return that seemed a little bit nicer than a 7-yard punt return, and did a pretty good job at one point of almost selling a running into the returner penalty that should have probably been flagged. It was not, but he just looked comfortable out there, and that's not something Notre Dame's had in the punt game this year to date, whether it's been Greathouse or Faison out there. So shout out to Max Hurleman, and also just filling just a nice little niche on special teams there.
I thought he looked good against Purdue too. Like he doesn't want to go back there and just catch the ball and hand it to the official. Like he wants to return it. That one that he did return for 7 yards, like that was a pretty obvious fair catch candidate. And he was like, no, I want to get some out of this. And he did. And I was like, in the moment, I was pretty nervous just because I think the rain had picked up a little bit at that point. I would have been totally content if he just fair caught that one. But he made some nice plays, man. And I think that he took advantage of his opportunity against Purdue. And that's going to lead to more opportunities down the road because, yeah, I think people are going to see, oh, he's a Colgate transfer and just kind of dismiss him as a player. But, like, he was a really, really, really good football player there. So it's not like this guy is just some scrub out there. This guy can really play.
He can. And Notre Dame, again, another great pickup in the transfer portal this year. So congrats to them on that front and a job well done.
I want to highlight a couple other transfers, Jordan Clark, Rod Hurd, and then a non-transfer in Leonard Moore, because Notre Dame was missing their top 3 cornerbacks from the previous week at one point in this game because Benjamin Morrison was out. He ended up coming back in the game. Christian Gray was out, and Jaden Mickey left the team because he's going to redshirt and transfer at the end of the year. Leonard Moore played so well in his first start, and he wasn't even playing the same position that he had been training at basically since the moment he arrived on campus. He had been training as the boundary corner behind Benjamin Morrison, but then he started at field corner in replace of Christian Gray. I thought he played so well. Yes, he gave up the touchdown, but Ja'Cory Brooks is a really good player, made some great plays, and Tyler Shuck made some great passes to him. This was Jordan Clark's best game of the season. He's been really strong at nickel this year, but given the injuries, he actually had to split out and play cornerback as well with Leonard Moore, and then that allowed room for Rod Hurd, who's been a backup safety, to then come in and play nickel. And in the moment, I was like, man, this is not good because Louisville's passing attack is really good, and they held their own. So props to them. I thought all 3 of them contributed in a big way. Yeah, they gave up some plays, like Rod Hurd gave up that big catch to Colin Lacey, but he made an unbelievable one-handed grab on the sideline. So I think when you consider the circumstances and who they were going up against, these guys played really, really well and basically saved this defense and saved this season from going somewhere where I don't think anyone wanted it to go.
Definitely. Those guys were all critical on Saturday. And you mentioned Moore and Hurd both letting up big plays. Like, I don't really think there was much more they could have done, either of them, on either of those plays. It's not like it was bad coverage at all. And definitely, again, just speaks to Notre Dame defensive coaching ability to scout out guys in the transfer portal and convince them to come to Notre Dame and really find guys that fit their defense. But we had heard some players talk about Leonard Moore in the preseason and how he might be the best cornerback on the team when it's all said and done. Based on how he played on Saturday, I think he's got a pretty bright future. So while we're on that topic, though, I do want to give some props to the mainstay in the secondary, the guy that's really been steady all year and been healthy all year, and that's Xavier Watts. He had another interception that, frankly, was a bit of a gift. It should have been probably caught for a first down, but again, he's in the right spot and returned it 34 yards as well to set up a Notre Dame, I think, field goal off that drive, right?
Yeah.
he also had 2 passes defended. And the thing about him is he just seems to be so steady and always in the right place. You don't want to go up against him in the pass game. Like, this is a guy that came back last year or came back this year, and you're kind of wondering, like, did he make a mistake? What can he really do? I mean, he's not going to have as great of a statistical year as last year where he was the defensive player of the year, but he really has improved the things that he probably needed to improve on, like coverage and tackling and just understanding defense better. And that's been really impressive to see. So props to him, and really Notre Dame, he's an indispensable part of their defense.
Yeah, after the game, he credited his ability to always be in the right place at the right time to his instincts. And it's like, okay, yeah, you have good football instincts, but he's barely been playing the position. Like, he's only been playing safety for just over, 2.5 years now. So the fact that he just knows where the ball is going to be, and that play, while I'm with you, it absolutely should have been a first down for Louisville. But the fact that, like, when it bounced up, he immediately caught it and was on the move, like, it looked so natural. And I think a lot of times guys would be like stunned, catch the ball, and maybe go down or not really make a move. Like, it almost looked like it was planned. He caught the ball and was immediately on the run the other way, to the point where I was like, whoa, like, does he actually have the ball? Did he just strip it out? And then you see the replay and you're like, oh no, that just bounced. So he looks a lot better than he did last year, because I think, everyone remembers the second half of his season, but I thought at the beginning of the season, he was just a good player. Like, he is picking up right where he left off last season and has come out super hot right out of the gate.
And Notre Dame's needed every part of it, because without that performance on Saturday, I think Louisville's receivers were good enough to make a lot of teams pay. So big performance from him on Saturday.
All right, I want to flip it over to the offensive side of the ball and give some love to Jaden Greathouse. That's my second thing I liked in this one, because that looked like the Jaden Greathouse we expected to see going into the season. He played a lot more in this one than he did in the previous week, played 30 snaps. He had a great catch on the opening drive, and it was a great play by Riley Leonard to roll out of the pocket and then continue to look downfield, which has been a big criticism for him so far this year. And he made a great play there, found Jaden Greathouse. Then he followed it up with his first touchdown catch of the year. He finished with 4 catches and 61 yards, and it was especially important because up to this point, Bo Collins has been Notre Dame's go-to wideout, and it was a rough day for him. He only had 1 catch or 5 yards, and he had 2 drops in this one. So Notre Dame needed a wide receiver to step up. Jaden Greathouse did that, and it came at a much-needed time. I'm hoping that this game can be used as like a launching point for him, and he starts to put up that same kind of performance week in and week out to get this passing game going along.
I hope so too, because you're right. Collins did have a rough game. The 2 drops were tough. And I thought that Chris Mitchell was kind of invisible out there, but Greathouse, along with Harrison and also Jaden Thomas, who had 1 nice play as well, I thought all played really good games. And that is exactly, like you said, who we were expecting to see from Jaden Greathouse. But while we're on that topic and that catch he had that you mentioned on that first drive, the first drive, Riley Leonard was the best he's looked all season. He led the offense to go 75 yards on 12 plays, score a touchdown. He was 4 for 5 for 26 yards passing, but that 19-yard pass, it was significant to me because he stepped up in the pocket and didn't just bail and run. He found a way to actually get it to him downfield. He also had a 4th down conversion on that drive through the air to Jaden Thomas and ran for another 24 yards himself. So if we can see that guy more often, wow, this offense can actually do some things. But unfortunately, we haven't quite reached that level of consistency. But that first drive was the best he's looked all season.
He looked great on that drive. I thought the play call on that 4th and 3 play, you got Riley Leonard rolling to his left, and then he throws it, going away from his body to Jaden Thomas, hits him right there in the chest on the sidelines. And again, it's raining at this point a little bit, so that's a difficult throw, even though it wasn't for a huge gain, because the actual distance the ball traveled was pretty, not like super far or anything like that. But on a 4th down, he had to put it in one spot. He did it. And then it was so weird to me that they really did not go back to that same kind of play very much the rest of the game. So I want to ask you, do you think that the coaching staff changed the game plan and offense, whether it be because maybe Riley Leonard was a little bit more banged up than we thought after he went down with what he said was just getting the wind knocked out of him? Or do you think that it had more to do with the fact that, while the defense kept dropping like flies, so they needed to burn clock as much as possible. Like, I noticed a pretty significant shift in the play calling from the beginning of the game to the end of the game, and I just wonder, we can try to speculate and figure out what it is, but I wanted to know what you thought contributed to that.
There definitely was a difference. I think initially I thought that the difference was could be accounted to Riley Leonard's injury, but as he stated after the game, he did just get the wind knocked out of him. And then later in that game, it seemed like they were trying to kill him with how much they were running him. So I don't know that, in fact, the injury would have been the reason for driving the seemingly change in play calling styles. I think the point that's probably more valid is that the defense really was turning into a graveyard out there, and you probably wanted to keep those guys off the field, especially as you had some young players out there. And I mean, like, at one point I looked out there and the defensive line was Bryce Young, Logan Thomas, and I don't even, maybe Donovan Heinisch in the middle. And then they had like a lot of young guys in the secondary as well. KVA was out there, a linebacker too. Like, it's not, and there was a critical juncture in the game in the third or fourth quarter. It's probably not what you thought you were going to see going into that game. So definitely could probably understand why the offense or there may have been direction to the offense to slow some things down and try to choose some clock because of the injuries that the defense was facing.
Yeah, I think I'm really just focusing on that last drive of the game when Notre Dame got the ball back with over 5 minutes to play. They get 1 or 2 first downs. That game is over because Louisville had burned all their timeouts by that point. I understand you want to, run the ball so that you're guaranteeing the clock is going to run a little bit there. But I just felt like they were stacking the box so much that they could have ran another rollout play like that and then found one of the wide receivers in space because they just decided to run it up the middle with Riley Leonard, and that was going nowhere. So it was basically like they were just handing the ball back to Louisville, but they decided to take 2 minutes off the clock. So I just hated how conservative they were in that moment. But then again, if Riley Leonard rolls out, throws an incomplete pass, everyone's going to be mad about that as well. But last thing I liked here, and this is important, getting the last laugh against Louisville rules. You could tell how much this meant to the players on Notre Dame after the game. There was that video circulating where all the Notre Dame players were chirping them, a lot of L's down, which I can respect. Jane Greathouse had a perfect one. Jordan Faison was getting there as well. You got Jeremiah Love just doing a backflip right in front of them. So clearly there was a lot of jawing going on in this game. You heard Jordan Clark say that the reason that he hit the player on Louisville was because that guy spit in his face on the drive before that. I think he could have retaliated in a less obvious way, but still, there was a lot of animosity between these two teams. I'm sure that part of it dated back to last year when Louisville dominated Notre Dame, but it also meant a lot for me. And these teams don't play each other likely until 2030. That's at least the next time they're on the schedule. And yeah, there was some noticeable tension between the fan bases on social media and at the actual game. So the fact that Notre Dame gets this win, and it's probably going to be the last time these two teams face off against each other for a few years, just it feels it's not just a normal game. Even though it's not a rivalry game, this one meant a little bit more to the players of the fan base, and I'm glad that Notre Dame gets the last laugh, at least for the next 4 years.
And probably specifically to you as well. We should make even more clear, or make clear again. if there's anybody else out there that you want to deliver a specific message to, it's your time before I jump in.
No, I'm good. I think I said what I needed to say over text.
Yeah, fair enough. But I agree. It was not something that I noticed during the game, but as the game's ending and I see Jeremiah Love do a cartwheel and then a backflip, and then I see Christian Gray, who didn't even play, just screaming. And they're not. What was interesting was they were not running to shake the other team's hands. They were just basically saying, like, F you and, like, go home, which I thought was really interesting because you don't see that often. Then you hear John Bryce from Football Scoop say that apparently Marcus Freeman had the Notre Dame Louisville game played on loop in the locker room for the entire week leading up to the game. So there might have been a lot of energy just based on how sick they were of seeing Sam Hartman give the ball to the other team a half dozen times in that game. So that was interesting. You don't see that often, and all I can say is I hope Louisville truly had a miserable bus ride home to Louisville.
Yeah, 4.5 hours. It's not a very exciting ride. It's one that I've done many times, and it's just basically 4.5 hours of dead, lifeless Indiana land. But I think a lot of Notre Dame fans got a taste of what the Louisville football team and the Louisville fan base is like. And it's something that I've been dealing with over a decade plus since my family moved there. And this wasn't breaking news to me, but I think a lot of people were surprised, especially dating back to last year. Like, whoa, this fan base likes to chirp a little bit. I thought the players did too. Like, I don't want to say that they were a dirty team because I don't think that they were, but they teetered on it. Like, I thought the play when Riley Leonard got hurt was pretty weak. He was clearly down, and then you just got a big defensive lineman just landing on top of him, and he throws his shoulder into Riley Leonard's shoulder. Like, it's not a penalty. I mean, they could have called it, but, you know, it's kind of in a gray area on that play because he's still the play was still alive. But they certainly like to toe the line a little bit, and I think their fan base kind of loves that. And look, every single fan base in the entire world, in every sport, there's always going to be some fans who ruin it for everyone, but I just thought that the Louisville fans were a little bit more vocal in this one, so I certainly enjoyed it a little bit more than most.
Yeah, you reap what you sow. So hope they enjoyed that ride home in the rain just quite well.
I know it does kind of suck now though that Notre Dame needs Louisville to win some games because at least Texas A&M is winning. So Notre Dame's strength of schedule
NIU
looks a little bit better.
Not.
NIU is not winning. They are doing quite literally the opposite, but good for Thomas Hammock for capitalizing on those. 2 weeks of fame. Happy for you. Luke will be right back here with us in a second to go over everything we didn't like from the Louisville game. But before we get to that, it's time to highlight my Roy Player of the Week. Roy is a new platform that lets fans make contributions directly to their favorite athletes. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter referral code LOCKEDON, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. This week, we've selected Notre Dame safety Xavier Watts for his incredible performance against the Louisville Cardinals, and I'm giving Watts $100 on a Roy. If you were impressed, as we were, with his performance on Saturday, you can show him some love too. He came up big for the Irish with an interception and 2 passes defended, and he came up when it mattered most for the Notre Dame defense. And now you can just hop on Roy and throw in a few bucks. If everyone pitches in, say $10, it adds up fast for Xavier Watts. Now you have the chance to show your appreciation for Xavier Watts and his standout performance this week, as well as what he'll continue to bring to your program. Get off the sidelines and into the NIL game with Roy. All right, let's get over to things that we didn't like from this one. What stands out to you?
To me, it's how unnecessarily close that game was. There were 2 fumbles lost inside the 25-yard line that led to an immediate 14 points, basically. I'm sure that Louisville could probably argue something similar with the bad snap on the punt, as well as that interception that I mentioned was kind of a gift. But those in particular just felt a little bit different to me. And I felt like Notre Dame had a lot of opportunities to put these guys away. And instead, they just kind of went away or went asleep for an hour and a half on offense instead. And then, of course, we almost had that almost defensive touchdown that would have provided a 17-point lead and just would have been game over. Now, what I'll say about that play is I guess I'm glad they let it play out, but that was maybe like the most obvious incomplete pass of all time. At least I thought so in real time. So just the fact that Logan Thomas returned it all the way, only for them to say, actually, we're kidding. That kind of sucked as well. But I think Notre Dame had an opportunity to win this game by like 3 or 4 touchdowns, and that just didn't happen.
That play where Benjamin Morrison came out on the corner blitz, forced the fumble, Logan Thomas returns it. From my vantage point, so I was behind the quarterback on that play. I'm with you. It looked like an obvious pass. It was sort of an odd situation where when they showed the replay, I was like, wow, that actually was way closer than I thought live. Like usually it's the other way around. Like if Morrison is there a split second earlier, like he played it perfectly. He got his hands up, hit his arm, but Shuck just got it forward a little bit. So yeah, I didn't get to enjoy that at all. I didn't celebrate for 1 second. I'm like, yeah, this is coming back. But then when they showed the replay, I was like, man, that was really close. And you're right. Like imagine if that happens and then we're talking about this game entirely differently. So it shouldn't have been close. It was, but it still felt like Notre Dame was in control. Like, did you ever think that Louisville was actually going to win that game?
Not until the last drive where I thought Shuck was going to lead him down for a touchdown. They're going to go for 2 and win the game. I did think that then.
Yeah, there were some serious Ohio State vibes at that point because it's like, wow, Notre Dame had the ball with the chance to end it. They didn't do it. Now they're giving the ball back. And then, honestly, shout out to the crowd because they came up huge. Like that delay of game came at such a critical time. They were going to run the ball probably get the first down. And I also think that Jeff Brom's clock management certainly helped Notre Dame out there a little bit there at the end. But that was a big moment. So happy for the crowd in that situation. But I also want to talk about something that we've already alluded to a little bit, and that is the injuries. And it's getting to the point where it feels a little bit like 2015 all over again, because that team was immensely talented. We thought going into this season that this team was loaded. And despite the fact that at the beginning of the season, it looked like they were going to come out of camp okay, and they still did lose Charles Jagasaw, who was their starting left tackle in like the first week of camp. I know that Marcus even said it was like one of the healthiest camps they've ever had. It's like, yeah, but you did have one really bad injury. The one that they had was particularly awful. And now it looks like they lost Boubacar Traore for the season, most likely. We haven't gotten an official word, but I would be genuinely shocked if he plays another snap for Notre Dame this season. Jordan Faison is probably going to be out for several weeks after he re-aggravated that ankle injury. So let's just go through some of the key injuries that have already happened this season before the month of October. So they lost their starting left tackle, Charles Jagasaw, for the year. Against Northern Illinois, Riley Leonard got hurt, seriously impacted the outcome in that one. Josh Burnham got hurt. He was going to miss several games. Purdue, they lose Ashton Craig and Jordan Battelle for the season, and they lose Billy Strouth for several weeks. Against Miami, Cooper Flanagan got hurt and Christian Gray got hurt. And now against Louisville, you got Boubacar, Jordan Faison again, Benjamin Morrison, and potentially Sam Pendleton. Plus, Mitchell Evans doesn't really look like himself. So the injuries are starting to pile up. I think it's totally just bad luck. But hopefully over the bye week, this team can get healthy and they can get some good luck their way, because it has been a particularly brutal last couple weeks.
And you didn't even mention Jack Kaiser there from this past game either.
Yeah.
So
has there been any report about that?
All I heard was, and I forget who said this, so apologies, that he had an injury going into the game and tried to tough it out. He only played like 15 snaps.
Right.
So not a lot of snaps for him. And that actually was going to lead me to my second thing that I wanted to say. This is somewhat selfish, but there's a very large lack of clarity on who is hurt and how long they're going to be out for. And I understand that a lot of coaches do this, right? And actually, as we're kind of talking about this, Gabe Rubio is another guy that we thought might be back by this time. He's not. I have no idea if he's going to be back by Stanford. I have no idea if Billy Strouth's going to be back by Stanford. They need him out there. Rocco Spindler had a really rough game. And as you mentioned, Sam Pendleton could be hurt too. So it's just Notre Dame's got a weird policy on injuries. And I can understand wanting to protect your players, but in what world, like, are you not allowed to ask about injuries? And maybe it's better just because they're not going to give you a real answer, but that doesn't feel like a sustainable way to, or a sustainable way to manage that. I mean, there's a reason the NFL has rules exactly around this stuff so that this type of stuff doesn't happen, right? So I would like a little bit more clarity on what's going on with these guys and when they're going to be back. That's all. But we're not going to get it.
Yeah. And the integrity of the injury report is already being called into question because they didn't even include Christian Gray on it when it was pretty clear that he suffered some sort of an injury. Like, it'd be one thing if they just referred to him as questionable and that he didn't play, because at least in the week leading up, it's like, okay, because there were all kinds of rumors that he was dealing with something, but he did practice. He just had a red jersey. So it's like, okay, he's clearly hurt. Why is he not listed on the injury report? So now whenever they come out with one and they're going to point to that, it's like, oh, well, like, they don't owe you any answers to any questions about injuries because they put out this injury report. Well, if the injury report isn't entirely truthful, then like, what's the point? We're just going around in circles here, and no one is like happy with the amount of information that's being given. And look, I understand that you're going to protect your players and you're going to try to keep something secret for a competitive advantage, but it all feels very weird because they instituted this new policy about not being able to ask, and it's weird. And also, you add in the fact that Notre Dame has had a bunch of injuries while this is all going on. It just leads to more questions than answers.
It really does. And I do want to say that I don't know. It's just like the 2015 sentiment. It's kind of scary because I had that same thought during the game on Saturday. And that makes you kind of believe that it's not going to stop anytime soon, but knock on wood, hopefully it does.
Yeah, I can't remember a season when they're like, yeah, everyone was just dropping like flies earlier in the year, and then it just completely settled down. It doesn't normally happen
Doesn't really
that way.
seem to be that way.
All right, what else did you not like from this one?
So you touched on this a little bit with Mitchell Evans not looking like himself. I just think that they could do a better job of getting him involved too. He had 3 catches for 14 yards on Saturday. I don't think he had any more targets than that third target, but they're just not very nuanced routes that they're throwing to him on. And I feel like there's more that Notre Dame can do to get him involved, because that could really open up some things. And maybe you're right. Maybe it is just that he's still not fully healthy. I mean, that'd probably be perfectly understandable. He tore his ACL less than a year ago, but I just feel like there's some more opportunities to get him more involved there.
Yeah, and they actually used him a little bit like a decoy in this one. When they did that throwback screen, Leonard kind of moves over to his right, and it looks like he's going to throw it to Mitchell Evans in the flat, and then he turns around and throws it back to Jeremiah Love. So he's still an impactful player, but not nearly as impactful as we thought he'd be, because we figured he'd be fully healthy at this point. Now, I will say that when I rewatched it, Louisville did bracket him a lot. Like, they really keyed on him, especially on third downs. Like, there were really not any times where, like, okay, big third down, Notre Dame needs to make a pass here. In the past few games in all of last season, they just go to Mitchell Evans, and it didn't matter if a corner or a defender was blanketed all over him. He would just make the play, because if you just put it in his vicinity, he's going to come down with it. Well, he didn't even have any opportunities in this one. If you look at the PFF grades, the worst grade on offense is Jadarian Price, who had 5 snaps and a fumble that led to a touchdown. Right behind him was Mitchell Evans, who was actually out there for 46 snaps and just wasn't. It was not a great game for Mitchell Evans. And I'm hopeful that maybe with the bye week and everything, he can start to look and feel like himself again, because Notre Dame desperately needs a tight end to step up. And with Cooper Flanagan out and Eli Raridon not really taking that leap, they need their guy, Mitchell Evans, to come through here in the second half of the season.
They do. And there's definitely an opportunity for that to come back, for him to come back in roaring form after this. But yeah, I'd just like to see more.
This actually leads me to the next thing that I didn't like, and that's just the passing game overall. Because, yes, they made some strides in this one. It's good to see. Riley Leonard, 3 passing touchdowns. Luke Smith weddings attended in the month of September 2. So he hit the over there. Huge news for everyone involved. But the third one came on a screen to a running back. So it didn't really feel quite as good. Jane Greathouse was wide open. And I think part of this has to do with the fact that we watched that Notre Dame Louisville game, and it was an absolute slog on offense for about 2.5 quarters. And then everyone in the college football world watched Alabama, Georgia, and as Pete Sampson from The Athletic put it on Twitter, it looked like a different sport. And I know that is kind of become a cliche, but it really has. There are wide receivers everywhere in the country. Like, even the bad teams have good players on the outside. I'm not saying that Notre Dame doesn't have good players, but they haven't figured out how to utilize them yet. And it is just so frustrating not watching a fun, high-powered offense after so many years without it. And again, not breaking any news here, but just a lack of a really fun passing game overall hurts, especially when you watch a game like Alabama, Georgia, and you see the athletes all over the field on the outside. And it's like, damn, like, why can't Notre Dame get anywhere close to that? It just doesn't make any sense.
It is pretty impressive. And even having somebody in the passing game as competent as Tyler Shuck, honestly, would even change probably perception. Like, some of those throws he made were ridiculous, which I don't know if he could make those throws again, if we're being honest, but he did it like numerous times on Saturday. Both touchdown throws were crazy. That I don't know the last time Notre Dame's had a guy like that who could make throws like that in the passing game. Maybe it might be since the guy who was actually at the game on Saturday, Jimmy Clausen, was there, to be honest.
The audacity to even make that touchdown pass when he had Drake Bowen just coming right down at him, about to blow him up. He turns and throws it like across his body. Does the number one thing you're not supposed to do, which is roll out and throw it back to the middle of the field. Not only does he do that, he does it in the end zone with 3 Notre Dame defenders in the area, and he throws it perfectly for a touchdown pass. That was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was. I knew it was crazy in the moment live, but when I saw the video of it later, it was even crazier.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. Props to him, man. It makes you really wonder, like, what could his career be like if he didn't get hurt so frequently, because clearly he's got a lot of talent. He also has some great receivers to throw to. Like, did you ever imagine that Colin Lacey would have the impact that he had in this one?
I didn't think he was going to play, so no.
Yeah. I saw on the day of the game that he was going to, quote, try to give it a go. And I remember thinking, like, this dude's going to have a huge game. It's just, if he's going to play, he's going to dominate. And he didn't dominate per se, but 5 catches, 71 yards. Like, he looked really good, including the best catch of the day. That one-handed one on the sideline was unbelievable.
It was. But thankfully, not too big of a game breaker, but he did definitely play well.
All right, the last thing, and this kind of goes hand in hand with what you said earlier about the fact that this game was probably unnecessarily close. Notre Dame just seems to lack a killer instinct under Marcus Freeman. I've kind of alluded to this before. Like, it's so weird because he can be aggressive with his decision-making. Like, he had some aggressive play calls on 4th down, but then he would run the most conservative play, like running it with Riley Leonard right into the teeth of the defense on 4th and 3. That's not, the most aggressive play call in the world, but this team just lacks aggression sometimes, and it's frustrating. You had an opportunity to dominate a top 15 team who embarrassed you last season, and you just didn't do it. Like, yes, the win is great. You could tell it meant a lot to the team because of the chippiness and everything involved there, but it just feels like they had a moment, they had an opportunity to really make a statement, and they just couldn't do it. And I don't know if that's a mentality thing, and I think part of this has to do with what Marcus Freeman said before the Miami game on the broadcast a couple weeks ago when he was like, yeah, Miami should have a lot of confidence coming in here. It's like, it's just so weird because I think maybe behind closed doors, he has this aggressive mantra and then he just does things that completely contradict that. And I just don't get it at this point. And I unfortunately don't think it's changing anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, it could also connect to your last point about the passing game overall. It's kind of hard to have that killer instinct when you don't trust your quarterback enough to throw downfield or really throw the ball past 2 yards past the line of scrimmage outside of a couple just shockingly out-of-character plays from Notre Dame. I think that probably makes it really hard to have that instinct.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. And, again, bye week came at a perfect time for this group. So I think that's all I got in the Louisville game. You got anything else you want to add on the actual game from Saturday?
No. I do think it's ironic that Jeff Brom, kind of openly was given this whole thing about having a headset advantage over Freeman, and he coached a really poor game on Saturday. Just some of the worst clock management I've ever seen. So shout out Jeff Brom. I honestly think it was better that Notre Dame was not a top 5 team and was a top 16 team, because I think he would have been more locked in if they were top 5 and just not just a top 20 team. So thank God we lost to NIU, I guess, huh?
I was surprised by the amount of gifts he gave Notre Dame there at the end. But what are you going to be doing during the bye week?
I've got nothing. This is going to be the first time I'll be in my apartment in 7 or 8 weeks on a weekend, so that'll be nice.
Yeah, it'll be nice going through a weekend without as much stress and anxiety, but I already know that come Saturday at 4 o'clock, I'm going to be pretty bored. I'm like, what is this sense of normalcy that I feel right now? I'm not used to this on a Saturday.
I don't even know what the slate is this weekend. I have no idea who's playing who, so
it's not particularly great, to be honest with you.
Okay. Well, that's I guess we'll see then.
Yeah. All right, Luke, we'll see you again next Tuesday. Maybe take stock of the season at large and then get ready for the second half. But as always, this was a good time.
Yeah, sounds like a blast.
Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And if you're looking for a wager for that first $5 bet, let's look at some popular same-game parlay bets available now on FanDuel. And we're going to look ahead to the Thursday night game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons. FanDuel's got a popular 4-leg parlay right now. Here's what it is. Tampa Bay money line, take the over on the total points, which you can get right now for 43.5. Bijan Robinson, anytime touchdown score, and Mike Evans, anytime touchdown score. If you bet $10 on this 4-leg same-game parlay, you could win $107.81. For more, just visit FanDuel.com today. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Even though it's the bye week, I've got plenty of new episodes coming your way the rest of the week, including another mailbag at the end. So remember to get those questions in. You can submit yours in the YouTube comments or on social media. Twitter account is @LockedOnIrish. Instagram is @LockedOnIrishPod. Also, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and I'll see you all tomorrow.